Every once in a while, somebody like you maybe texts me or emails me something that I should put in a sermon. I'm not sure what you're trying to tell me, but anyway, the other day, one of our members emailed me some words from a speech that Barbara Bush gave to a college audience when her husband was the president. And so I'm just going to read it to you. I'm not sure what most of my stuff doesn't make sense anyway, so why not start with Barbara Bush? Here's what she said. She said, whatever the era, whatever the times, one thing will never change. Parents, if you have children, they must come first. You must read to your children, hug your children, love your children. Your success as a family and our success as a society depends not on what happens in the White House, but what happens inside your house. And this is when her husband was in the White House. I always liked Barbara Bush, politics aside. Every time I saw her on TV, I thought it was my grandmother. She had that blue-collar kind of ordinary grandma look about her, and yet somehow in her ordinariness, she kind of captured the majesty and the passion of the human spirit. And we don't all have children, but we're all part of a family, and maybe our family has one or two people, maybe our family has 100 people. And most of us in our family, we have flaws. Sometimes things are not as right in our family as we would like them to be. And then control freaks like me try to change it, as if we're supposed to have control over that. And I realize that's not what life is about. It's okay as a person to be a little bit flawed, and it's okay for our families to be flawed. I don't know about you, because that's why, to me, our shared faith is so important. Because in the middle of trying to live our lives and take care of ourselves and our families and our jobs and all the other stuff, in the middle of all the stuff that we go through, the good stuff, the bad stuff, the in-between stuff, that's where God lives. In the middle of all that. That's where His Spirit speaks, and that's where somehow God gives us the strength to deal with what we have to deal without getting too down on ourselves. A couple things happened this week that reminded me of why we're here. And maybe as I share my little snippets, maybe you can think of what you've been through this week. This was my week to go to Marion Village, an assisted living place in Homer Glen, and you know, I become so popular, they sell tickets to get in on Wednesday afternoon. So I get there on Wednesday, and I always kind of have my bucket, my wafers, and my wine, and my Bible, and I kind of peek through the door to see if anybody is in there. And I peek in there Wednesday, and my gosh, there's 10 folks there. Second month in a row, I've hit double digits at Marion Village. Pretty excited. Well, anyway, I get ready, and I go up to, walking up the aisle to get ready for the service, and this little older lady who's never been there before, she goes, "Psst. How do you spell psst?" It's like this, psst. And she said, "Reverend, before we start, I need you to pray for me." And I said, "Well, I'd be glad to pray for you." And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Well, my daughter just died. And she's been battling cancer. And I know she's in heaven. I know she's pain-free. But I'm just really sad." And I said, "Well, that's okay, because you're not supposed to say goodbye to your son or your daughter." And so I talked to her and we prayed. Then I realized, I was so tempted a few months ago to just stop going because hardly anybody came. And that's because the egomaniac in me was judging the success of the service by how many people were there, not by what was inside the people that were there. I'll never do that again. 1, 2, 3, nobody. It's all about what's inside your soul on that particular day. We also have a gentleman that makes deliveries here on a pretty regular basis. In fact, the UPS guy had been on vacation. And he comes in to deliver something, and he stops and he looks at me and he says, "Where's Harley?" And he said, "I've been on vacation." I said, "Well, Harley died." And he just starts to cry. He said, "For the past 7 years, I come in here and that big hunk of love is right there. And all of a sudden it's missing." And then this other guy, he comes in, he always stops and talks to us. And he was so excited because he was a grandparent for the first time. And even though his son and girlfriend were not married, he was a grandparent. And he'd come in and he'd show pictures, and the 2-year picture, the 3-year picture. And then the other day, he's almost in tears. And I said, Bill, what's going on? And he said, well, my grandson's mom decided that she was going to move. And so she moved way off to the East Coast. And he said, I don't know if I'll ever see him again. And I just gave him a big hug, because he was hurt. And he was so excited about being a grandparent. Now it's going to be from a distance. I've been thinking of Peggy's late husband, Michael, when I probably one or two may have been through this, but back in 2004, he's home, and there's a knock on the door. And he opens the door, and there's the military standing there. And you know what that is. Letting them know that your loved one has been killed in action in Iraq. And I just can't imagine what that's like to go through that. And then Heartland Children's Home. And I hope you'll believe me when I say this. We stopped going there a couple years ago with a whole bunch of kids. We had been doing it for 20 years, and we just couldn't do it anymore because they're getting older. And shame on me that it had been 2 years since me and Quentin and Peggy had gone down there. And you go to Heartland, there's every possible animal and human being God invented at Heartland. There's a lot of people, a lot of action. But we are their family. We are a connection. Whenever one of those kids who's fragile goes in the hospital, whenever something happens there, they call us and say, please put so-and-so in the prayer book. It means so much to them because they really don't have a church. They have a home and they got lots of noise and lots of racket, but they need a family, and we are their family. And that's why that connection is so important to them, and it's important to us. And you goofs, last Sunday, there weren't a whole lot of people in church. And I mentioned at the end of the service, wouldn't it be nice? And I mentioned a couple of the kids. I said, wouldn't it be nice to put some money in the love bucket to send to Heartland in honor of those kids, and maybe to do something when one of them passes? And when everybody was gone, it was about noon, I was putting stuff away. I get the love bucket. There's over $1,000 in the love bucket. And what is that about? It was a last minute thought. And when I called Heartland and told them that story, they were just stunned. And it's not about the money, it's about the fact that you care. It's about the fact that you don't let the miles between us get in the way of us being family to each other. And finally, the phone rings this morning. I'm putting the finishing touches on another mediocre sermon. And the phone rings, and it's Ken Block, who you may not have met because he comes every Sunday to the early service and ushers about every 2 or 3 weeks. And his wife has not been feeling that well, but Ken Block is an old school Lutheran. He loves to usher, he loves to come to church, and he married an old school Catholic who loves to go to Mass, but she's been coming here and almost likes it. And they're the ones that started the Charlie Fund because they had twin grandsons, and Sean survived, Charlie didn't, and that was like 7 years ago. And they're the ones that started the Charlie Fund, and some of your sons and daughters have been the recipients of scholarships from that. And I called Janet last week because I know she wasn't feeling well. And she said, Don, I want to tell you that your church, our church is one of the most kindest places I've ever been. Because you've embraced us, you've strengthened us. Then this morning I get a call from Ken that she's in the hospital. She had emergency surgery and she is not going to make it. So when I tell Ken, I said, well, I'll be there after our second Mass. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, wait a second, what did you just say? You'd be there after the second Mass? Didn't Barbara Bush say that the strength of our country is measured not by what goes on in the White House, but what goes on in our house? Maybe if she was seeing me today, she'd say, the strength of the church is not measured today by what goes on in your office. It's what goes on at Pales Hospital. So I left my sermon notes and just chucked it and said I went to the hospital. And we prayed because I realized that's where the church comes alive. I came back here afterwards just before the 8:30 service. And I saw the cut lawn, and I saw the mops hanging in Linda's office, and I saw the open door and the clean floor, and I saw a couple of the church bills on my desk. I saw my paycheck. I saw the sign has finally been raised up so you can read it. I think of all the stuff you do to make this place happen. And I realize this humble place the bricks and mortar surrounding this room, as imperfect as this place is, as human and as imperfect we are, when we walk out the door, we are the body of Christ. We are the arms and the legs and the voice and the spirit of Jesus. And if it doesn't live there, it does not live. There's a whole bunch of folks out there, in here, including me, who are nourished and depend on the goodness that you share every day. Amen. If you're able to, please rise for the creed. It's on page 105.